This is the Motherlands podcast. The intention of this podcast is to provide evidence-based information through honest conversations on fertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond by bridging together the two worlds of allopathic medicine and holistic practices to improve the reproductive health outcomes of women. I am your host, Keely Semler. Hi, welcome back to the Motherlands podcast. Thank you for being here. Today on the podcast, we have Jackie Shea. Jackie is a trauma-informed life, health, and business coach, and someone who I had the deep privilege in supporting through her birth experience. I had reached out to Jackie recently as I read on Instagram that she was choosing to stop sharing photos of her children publicly online, which immediately sparked my curiosity and interest. So I reached out to her to see if she might be willing to share her thoughts on the Motherlands podcast, and also to ask her what made her change her mind about sharing her children online. We also discussed together her experience of early motherhood, the shifts that naturally occur after starting a family, both within herself and with her partner, and how she supports herself to feel at ease in her mind and her body. If you enjoy this episode, please like and leave a review, as I'm told this is a way that other people can find us. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you again soon. I'm so glad that you are willing to chat today, and I have so many questions I want to ask you since I've seen you last. But on top of mine, what is it like going from one child to two children at home?
I really want to say that I'm so happy to be sitting with you. You're such an important part of my first birth. And we didn't use a doula for our second birth, but you're just amazing at what you do. You're so special out in this world of motherhood and birth. And anyone who gets to cross your path is so lucky.
Thank you.
You know, having a second, we thought of you a lot. It is different going from one to two. I don't want to scare anyone who's about to have a second. You know, it is like infinite more joy, actually, and infinite more work and time and energy. And one thing I will say for mothers, especially, my pediatrician alerted me to this, which I'm very grateful for, before we had our second. And she said, what's going to be the hardest is the emotional part, because you have only been there at this point. Like, your first has had all your attention. And of course, like, I had my attention and my husband had my attention, but really, like, whenever my first needed anything, like, I was going to be there for her. And she was like, when you have a second, like, someone is kind of always going without a want or need being met. And at the time I was like, oh, interesting. I couldn't really conceptualize. I was like, I'm so glad you're telling me this, but I didn't know. As soon as our second was born, it happened. Like, as soon as I was like, oh my God, I can't give my first everything I want to give her, and I can't give my second everything I want to give her. And it was really an emotional ride.
So how do you make sense of that when you have your little baby that requires you and needs you to stay alive, and then your older one that is seeing you with the little one? How do you kind of reckon with that?
Cry. No, I mean, how do you reckon with it? My baby is 5.5 months old, and my older one is 2 and a couple months old. So we had them really close together. So they're both babies, right? Like, they both have needs and wants. And the other reason I'm saying that is I'm still new to this. Like, I'm still finding a way and a rhythm. And on maternity leave, I made a point to spend a lot of time with my older one. A lot of special time with my older one, instead of just spending a lot of special time with my younger one. But I reckon with it by just sort of surrendering to, like, it's just different. Having two is different. And I would say that I am reckoning with it. I'm, as Brene Brown would say, like, I'm rumbling with it still. You know, I'm rumbling with, like, the emotional aspect of the amount of imperfection that has to be allowed in mothering too.
I'm so glad you're saying that because, I know that you do private one-on-one work with people, coaching, and I'm curious, how do you deal with mom guilt? Because I know that that is so common, and moms already feel so stretched physically, emotionally, everything, but the guilt, I feel like, is just constantly present for most of the women I work with. So how do you deal with that?
Ridiculous. So wild. I'm glad you're bringing it up. Keely, you're so good at being attuned to all things motherhood. Like without having the experience yet yourself, you're going to be such an amazing mom. Like I couldn't really understand these things, and you're so good at being in the heart of it. How do I deal with mom guilt? Well, first of all, mom guilt is so overwhelming. And I will tell a little story. I have an immune deficiency that's pretty serious, and I get treatment for it every 30 days. And it can be inherited. It can be. It can also not be, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So, anyway, I am pretty worried about passing this down, and I don't know for certain yet. And when my first came, like it was around 3 months and beyond, she started having a lot of chronic UTIs. And I am really health educated and informed. So I started like doing all the things I knew to do. I took her to all these specialists, like, because it was so many recurrent infections and it didn't make sense. And I was doing things at home and doing the best probiotics and vitamin C and this thing and that thing. And when we left the immunologist one day, it was like she got her first blood draw. It was
Oh.
so heart achingly like, oh, sensitive. And it was just a really hard day. Like we ran through the rain and we waited 2 hours at the appointment. And like it was a hard day. And I cried when I got in the car and I felt like I was failing her in all these ways. And I was like, if I gave this to her, like, can I forgive myself? Like there was just a lot of overwhelming emotion. And I had this thought at the time, she was like 1.5. I was pregnant. And I thought, am I going to do this the rest of my life? Am I going to consistently be like, am I a bad mom? Like, did I do that? Right? Like, this is mom guilt, right? And she's 1.5. And I had this thought, I was like, I am not willing to do this for the rest of my life. That is a certain kind of hell I do not want to live in. So I was like, all right, well, what do I have to do to not live in that kind of hell? I was like, I think I need to determine what being a good mother is to me. Like, I need to determine that, get that sort of like list down. And if I'm doing those things, like, I don't do guilt.
Mm.
Like, it had to be a hard line. I have very slowly since then been like generating what is being a good mother. Like, that has been a question in my body and on my radar. And I don't have the exact answer, but I know that I'm not willing to do like a lifetime of guilt.
Mm. It's really interesting to think about because I think as science progresses and we know more about disease and chronic illness, especially with diabetes and insulin resistance and people giving birth and basically their child inheriting insulin resistance or ending up with diabetes as an infant, I think a lot of people feel like they did something wrong or they failed, even with their baby just arriving here. And I don't know, sometimes I think about how the health industry and modern science and medicine isn't really doing us any favors as people to feel more confident as parents. If anything, it's scaring the shit out of people. And making people feel like they're not equipped enough or they're not healthy enough, and I wonder if that contributes to the guilt as well of just like, oh, well, am I healthy enough? And how do I be healthy enough and do enough? And at what point, what is enough?
Right. That's such a good point and question.
Yeah. Wondering, so you had your first 2.5 years ago. And I had the privilege of being there with you and your amazing husband. And I still to this day think about you guys, you wrote down some affirmations together. and you were in labor, like in the throes of labor. And I recorded this video of your husband like speaking out loud these affirmations to you during labor. And it's so sweet. And I tell all my clients, hey, write down some affirmations because that's like your cheat sheet in labor. So you had your first 2.5 years ago. What kind of identity shifts, if you've had any, related to how you show up for yourself or with work?
I will say that the identity shift has been so much more extreme since having two.
Mm.
If you can,
How so?
think with one, I didn't think there was still time, but there actually was still time. I was still finding enough time for me. My relationship to work didn't change all that much, except that I got more efficient. And now the time has become there's none. I went from having no time to having less time. So my identity shift has been more extreme having a second. I'm trying to remember what really shifted after having the first. And it was a really big shift from all my time is my own, right? And I get to do whatever I want whenever I want to none of that and to finding some sort of rhythm. And I think that was a really big adjustment to make. And my husband and I just worked together to each get our own pockets of time and to get pockets together. And I'm not really sure, Keely, it's such a good question. You sent it to me before. And I was like, I don't know what happened after number one. What I know happened after number two is I've stopped working 5 days a week. I work 4 days a week. I work 5 days a week, actually, but I only see clients 4 days, which is major for me. I am not hustling, I'm not putting out anything big or new right now. I am not working with people I'm not super excited to work with. I am protective of my energy in a whole new way. When I was pregnant with my first, a friend told me, she was like, not to sound super crass, but you'll see when you have kids, all the dead weight in your life falls away.
Mm.
And with number two, that's really happened. I'm like, bye, can't do that, can't respond to that. Nope, I'm a big no on that, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow. Does it feel isolating or does it feel
Yeah,
empowering or maybe a little
yeah.
bit of both?
So I think something that is extremely important for mothers, especially new mothers, is getting a community. No, it doesn't feel isolating at all. I feel more embedded in community than I've ever felt because that was an immediate intention. I felt super isolated the first couple of months after my first was born and went to a lactation support group, met a group of women there that I am still in touch with. We are on a text chain all the time. We get together, and then also met a group of women in my neighborhood and have connected with various parents through there. And I find a mom with a kid my kid's age, and we go at it. We're like, let's be friends. And I've got now more community than I've maybe ever had.
Wow, it's amazing how like one support group can really foster some amazing connections long term. And I think that that's something I think about a lot, being that I work with people in person, because there's so many things online and our time is limited, but the in-person support, the in-person community is really, I think, foundational for people. You can have a million friends online, but
Yeah.
how many of them know where you live and know that you have a dog that needs to be walked or,
Right.
whatever?
Right. And that lactation support group was online actually, but we took it offline. Right.
Wow.
We got each other's numbers. Some genius, I don't even remember who it was, some genius mother put us all on a text chain and we just took it away from there.
That's awesome. How did having children impact your connection with your husband? Was there
Mm.
anything that you discussed prior to giving birth in order to prepare for the transition? Or maybe it's impossible to really know what questions or what to even chat about to prepare, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, and I don't think it's impossible to know. We did have conversations prior that made the world of difference. I want to say, and knock on wood, my husband and I have had, I hear a lot of parents going through the rockiest of times after having kids. And I think it's very normal. And that has not been our experience. And
Mm.
I'm so grateful for that. And there are a few contributing factors. One is that we've been together now 10 years. Like, I knew what kind of dad he was going to be. I wasn't like in some delusion of like, he's gonna, wake up with them every day and take, like, I was like, I know exactly. He's not gonna wake up with them every day. Like, I get it. And so there was no like weird expectation that wasn't aligned with who I know my husband to be. And we did some work beforehand, like, and also like we've gone through stuff in our we work well together. You may have it, Keely. There's like a preparation for postpartum document. I don't know if you ever use those with your people. Postpartum plan template from the baby chick postpartum something.
Mm.
Anyway, it's really great. Like, we went through this whole document together. We determined like what kind of hours we'd be on and off and how we'd support each other, what kind of support I was going to need, what kind of support he was going to need. It just gave us a solid foundation. It also really helped to have a doula. And I got a postpartum doula too. Like, those things made a really big difference. With the second, it's been the same. We make a really high value of supporting each other in each other's needs. So we each get time to fill our own cups, and then we have like a date too.
That's beautiful.
What I want to say is, like, since having our second, we don't talk as much, which is sad. It's like we want to talk and we get to the table and we're like, I'm too tired. Like, no. We just like can't even get there. And so I created this thing that I heard on comedian talk about, basically, where all day long now we'll text each other topics of conversation to have when we come together. So I'll be like, add, why do we hate Tucker Carlson? Like, add, like, add, why are people driving like this? Add, look at this friend's haircut. Add, and he's like, add, I have a musician I just found that you'll like. And then we like talk about it when we come together. So we're like getting efficiency down.
I love that. And also, there was some recent study that came out that was like the average parents spend like somewhere between like 15 and 30 minutes a week during the work week talking or spending time with one another. That hits home, I think, for a lot of people. And I like what you're saying about how, like, yeah, you get to the table and you're like, yeah, no, we're just in two different worlds right now, and it is what it is. But later, we've got our topics that we're going to chat with each other about. I love that. I'm curious how, being a mother, what practices or activities do you do that help you feel more at ease in your body, especially if you're breastfeeding and you feel so tapped out with two human beings that need you all the time? Like, what are you doing for you?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I think everyone has their own non-negotiables. It's up to each woman in her body to determine what her non-negotiables are for self-care. My non-negotiables are top of the list nourishment. I know other mothers who can go all day without eating, who like don't really think about food. I am not that person. So I have had to find ways to get myself healthy, nourishing meals, which is not easy, right? So I do a lot of batch cooking, batch meal planning, and now cooking's just one of my hobbies. Like, that's just one of the main ways I spend my time. And I invite my children or my older child into that a lot. So food, number one. Sleep is, I would like to say, is up there. It's important that it be up there. And we are getting very little sleep in this house right now. So that has to just be what it is. What that means is that I practice rest when I really don't want to rest. I have to make a practice in this capitalist society we live in where like rest is not seen as valuable. I have to practice rest, even if it's for 30 minutes here or there on a day-to-day basis. I've started exercising once a week. Like, I just want to be super real here. Once a week. besides walking my dog every day, I take one yoga class once a week right now. That is what I am capable of doing.
With a 5-month-old?
With a 5-month-old and a 2-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that feels like a huge win.
Well, I love your honesty here. I mean, you're just like, it is what it is, and just the ability to accept what is right now without putting pressure or burden to do more or take on more or to be more active or whatever. You know, there's something really refreshing to hear you just go at the pace that is most supportive to where you are right now, as opposed to wishing you were somewhere else.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
Sure, sure.
No, I appreciate that. I'd been fighting the first few months of my second's life. I've been resisting just how much it's taken out of me. And now I'm like, yeah, this is just gonna be like slower.
What do you think is behind the resistance? Is it just things changing and it being uncomfortable or being unknown terrain, or what do you think?
Well, I think some of it is like our capitalist society, that says like your worth is in your productivity. Some of it is my own personal trauma that like I am an over functioner, not an under functioner, right? So when things get hard, I seriously over function. And I find my most comfort and security in action, action, action. So those are some of the things that keep me from resting. I also can operate on like, there's not enough time. Like, this is it. This is my time to do all the things in my life that I want to do, right? And I've had to be like, one of the things I want to do in my life is be a mother. So maybe just let go of some of these other things.
I'm laughing because I'm also extremely high functioning and feel way more comfortable doing all this stuff than, really sitting and slowing down, and but also recognizing the privilege in slowing down, like especially being a woman in a capitalistic society. It's like we all know we need to slow down and we're being told, oh, slow down, but like you need to have a robust enough security net to be able to do that,
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and part of that is, I think, discovering what, you need as an individual to feel secure enough to slow down. And
Yeah.
there's something about having kids that just really kind of brings it to the forefront for, I think, a lot of folks.
It does. It does. Like I am going to make less money this year than I made last year.
Maybe you gain more experiences with your young children that,
Yeah. Or I just won't burn out next year, right? Because I'm just choosing that right now. And it's tighter. And I'm just going to be in a world where it's tighter in honor of a 30-minute nap.
yeah. I was just talking to another former client of mine, and I think her daughter's like 3.5 now. We went and got coffee, and she said to me, Keely, work just isn't lighting me up anymore. My daughter has one childhood, and like work is always going to be there, but she's not. And, she just told me how like it just smacked her in the face, this reality of like, hey, like my child's only going to be young for a limited amount of time. And she said she did like one giant job that really took her out of the home for an extended period of time. And when she got back and just realizing how physically demanding that was, she's like, it just wasn't worth it to me, So it's nice to hear you mamas figuring out, like, wait a minute. Maybe that means making less money for now.
Right. For now.
For
Yeah.
now.
Right. And it's hard to make less money when my personal expenses and most mothers' expenses have just never been higher.
Well, and it's also like that is the mommy tax. You have kids and now you're being penalized.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. And it's a beautiful thing. I watch a lot of mothers in my business actually go through, oh, work isn't lighting me up anymore after having kids. And I'm grateful that that hasn't been my experience. And it's so normal and so common. And, work is certainly lighting me up. And because I have less time, I'm just not going to do the things that really don't light me up.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons why I was so happy that you were willing to chat with me is I saw online that you were choosing not to share about your children. And what I mean by that is photos or just any content in regards to your children. I'm curious what spurred your decision in not sharing your children on social media?
Thank you. And I want to be clear, I still have like a sweep to do on my social media, and because I have very little time to do things like that. I haven't done the full cleanup, but yes, I made that decision. I have precisely zero judgment of anyone deciding differently. Truly, I have zero judgment. And here's what happened. I read two articles, like sort of back to back. One, and I'm going to tell you, was on the New York Times, called "A Marketplace of Girl Influencers Managed by Moms Stalked by Men." So there's a lot of pedophilia going on. I do have two daughters. Doesn't matter. Pedophilia goes either way, but there's a lot of pedophilia going on social media. A lot of specifically the like dance kids, the dance girls, the gymnastic girls. There are moms like managing them into influencers. The comments on these photos are of pedophiles, just straight, like there's no hiding it. I mean, this is extreme, but the moms are even making money. Like there are some photos that are like paywalled and
Oh, yeah.
right. So I didn't really know about this.
Yeah, they're like accounts that are managed by parents that are generating a lot of money, and there
Yeah.
are no labor laws protecting these children. It's really, really devastating. And I think about like even something innocent like a clothing brand, but someone is using their children to model the clothes for that brand. I don't know, like it sits a little funny now to me, knowing that people are using children to sell something or to gain an audience that is not for the financial benefit of the child, but of the parents.
Right. I think a lot of those parents put that money into like college funds. I don't know. And it definitely is odd to me to watch these mothers knowing that they are like paywalling photos because they're more sexualized, like to these men.
Well,
Right. Like,
knowing that who the audience is for
right.
and still doing it anyway.
Right. Like that to me is surprising and odd and upsetting, of course. And I try to take a stance of like, I don't know what's happening in their lives and why that is. And it's a lot to take in. So I read that, and I certainly wasn't posting photos like that of my children. And still, it made me think about men looking at children on the internet. I want to also be really clear, partially because of my business, I'm not private on Instagram. Some people are private, and I think for those people, it makes a lot more sense. So that really freaked me out. The other article was even more interesting. It was in the Atlantic, and it was called "The First Social Media Babies Are Growing Up and They're Horrified."
Mm.
The subtext is, how would you feel if millions of people watched your childhood tantrums? This was like, oh yeah, like all those baby photos of me, food on my face, like in the bathtub, like
Potty training
potty training, like any of these childhood photos of me.
or
uh,
breastfeeding.
Breastfeeding, right? Like, how would I feel if those were all like ever on the internet for like all these people to see? And this one girl talked about how her mother, she's the center of the article, how her mother just posted all kinds of things about her. Like, I would have seen as innocent, actually, like, oh my God, my daughter just got her period. Oh my gosh, I'm, so emotional, or, first date, whatever, all of these things from this girl's, it's her life. Right. And she's like, it has had this huge impact on her life. And that paired with one of my values in parenting, or one of the ways I try to parent, is with a lot of respect. And so what does respect mean for these children that I have always my intent has always been to see them as separate from me, right? Like there's a lot of talk about my child, and it's like my intention as a parent has always been like, this is a separate soul here to have their own curriculum on this planet that I do not control or manage. I am their sole support. Like, may I give them a solid foundation? And if I'm going to look at parenting that way, then why would I ever think that I have the right? It's like me posting your photo everywhere, right? And being like, oh, haha, Keely just did this thing without asking you for your approval, right? There's bodily consent.
Mm-hmm.
There's treating the person in front of me like a full human, like they are.
And it's different, like if they decide when they get older that they would like images out there on the internet, which I think we, being millennials, had that choice. We consciously chose this. But it's interesting now because I do think that there are a lot of children that have been born or are young that haven't had any choice about what of them is being shared on the internet with either people they know and people they don't know or have yet to know. What about friends and family posting photos of your children?
It's a great question. It depends on the person. It depends on like how private they are, how many followers they have. My uncle posts photos and he's got like 200 friends on Facebook. He doesn't really post much. My mom does it. So it's like I don't feel 100%, I'm gonna police this whole thing. I just can't give that much energy in my life, like policing everyone, right? But I think I haven't run into it much yet. And I'm going to see. And I did just decide, and again, I have to do a whole cleanup on my page that, their names too, like their names and stories about them, right? Pictures are just one piece of the puzzle. I read a great Substack recently, and I noticed this mom, like she only referenced her children as her older one and her younger one because she was telling a story about them, right? And it kept them totally anonymous in this story. And I was like, yeah, that's right. They get to be anonymous on the internet.
I feel like you do such a good job at articulating that you just want to be mindful of what the experience is like for them without trying to control or micromanage everything about who they are and parenting and all that. Like you do such a good job of like having the intention of just wanting to be more mindful and more private to give them more autonomy and space to be whoever they want to be. And it's an interesting thing because I think from what I hear from a lot of clients, that knee-jerk wanting to control everything or micromanage things is strong, being that you're a mom just trying to provide for your children. But yeah, how do you balance that? Like from having this healthy perspective of giving them space and having your family or friends wanting to mention them and not wanting to impose too much or control everything about them. How do you deal with that?
Still pretty new to me. I mean, there are a lot of things in parenting that I really struggle to have a balance around. And
like what? Can I be nosy?
The biggest thing for me, Keely, and this might sound so wild, but I'm studied enough in trauma, right? I'm trauma informed. And I know quite a bit about childhood trauma, and I've got a hefty dose of my own. And I can get very obsessive, painfully obsessive, about this being their like one shot at a foundation for their brain's development. I'm very aware of parenting, especially parenting too. I found every second, every moment that I'm with them, there's always a choice point of like, how am I going to parent in this moment? What am I going to say in this moment? A choice point from like, does she get the snack? Does she not get the snack? How do I respond to this tantrum? How do I introduce this giant skeleton in Home Depot to her, right? Like, how do we watch that show or not that show? Do we do screen time or not screen time? How do I talk to her about her body? How do I talk to her when I change it? I mean, there is a choice point at every moment. And I am working through this phase of like, that there is one choice that leaves them least traumatized in life, that there is one choice that sets them up best
Mm.
right? For life. That has been very painful for me, for obviously. And the truth is, and I know this, many roads lead to Rome, right? Like
Mhm.
many, many, many roads lead to Rome. Usually there's a very clear thing that would be harmful, and the rest is like, take your pick. But that is an area that I have had a very hard time having balance around. Be on my phone, not be on my phone, like it's constant choices.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts around like punishment?
Oh God.
I just learned like recently there's this whole movement of, I think it's called positive punishment,
Uh-huh.
which sounds like an oxymoron to me, but there's so many different philosophies of child rearing and parenting and punishment. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
No, I do. I do have a thought on it. My thought is expect your toddler to be a toddler. Expect your kid to be a kid. I mean, look, I'm in a very specific stage with a baby and a toddler. If you're talking about punishment in toddlers, because that's the thing I can really speak to, I say there is none. Expect your toddler to be a toddler, which means their brain is not nearly fully developed. They barely have a neocortex going. They're like gonna have tantrums. They're supposed to have tantrums. They're supposed to, push boundaries. They're supposed to use their hands. So I don't, there's no punishment. There are other forms of correction, I guess,
Or,
modeling, I
or
think,
redirection.
redirection. Yeah. I think the most important thing we can do as parents is model, 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 model. You want a certain behavior, model a certain behavior. And like, if you want to have a kid who punishes themselves and punishes other people, punish them. I
Mm.
don't even know what punishing a toddler could possibly look like. Actually, I do know because I had a friend's husband punish their toddler recently, and it really bothered me.
Mm. That's so interesting. If you could go back to being pregnant again with your first child, is there anything you wish you could tell yourself?
Enjoy being pregnant without another child at home. Because pregnancy with a toddler at home is real hard. I'm going to say this thing. When I was younger, much younger, like a child, I actually have a journal from when I was like 11, 12, and in it I have written these words. I feel like I could be the true number one mom. Like,
Mm.
those number one mom keychains and stuff. Like, I had this idea that I could actually be that,
Mm.
the one, the real one. What I would tell myself is like something around there's no such thing as that, which seems obvious, but really like this is going to be a day at a time journey, motherhood. And it starts right now. And I'm very, very blessed that mothering myself came into my life long before having children. But a lot of mothers don't have that experience. So they are finding out in the throes of motherhood that like they need to mother themselves.
Mm.
And so if you are pregnant with your first, I want to say, like, now is a great time to be mothering yourself and practicing the skill of compassion, gentleness, ease, kindness, loving, spaciousness, being imperfect.
Hmm. So simple, yet really, really profound.
Yeah, so simple, hard for most of us to actually put into practice.
Hmm. Thank you, Jackie, for your time and your willingness to share. How can people connect with you if you want to be connected with?
Yeah, I do. I love connecting with people. My website, jackieshea.com, JACKIESHEA.com. There's contact form on there. My Instagram, which I just want to say at the time I got Instagram so long ago, I didn't know you could like create a fun Instagram name. I thought it had to be your just name.
Mm.
And they didn't have my name available, so I did it backwards. So I'm just at Shea Jackie. And I always laugh being like, I could have had anything, and that's what I got. And I know I can change it, but I don't. I'm also on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, and those are great places to find me.
And just really briefly, what kind of coaching do you do with your clients?
Yeah, I do life, health, and business coaching, and I coach a range of people from super sick people to CEO executives, leaders, and I coach coaches as well on building their businesses.
Beautiful. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for showing up as an amazing mama. And I just so appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate you and who you are in this world and to all us moms.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share with friends and family and stay tuned for the next episode.